"You do not know me, boy," Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reed whispered. "So why are you still trying to save me?" The white German shepherd did not look back. He lowered his shoulders, tightened his grip on the rescue strap, and pulled again. The movement carried Marcus only a few inches across the sand, but in that empty stretch of the Mojave Desert, a few inches felt like a promise. Noon had burned every color from the world. The sky was a pale sheet of heat. The distant ridges trembled behind waves of rising air, and the ground beneath Marcus held the sun like an iron plate. Sand had worked its way into his boots, his collar, and the corners of his mouth. Each breath tasted of dust and hot metal. Somewhere beyond the white horizon, a military search team was looking for him. At least, he hoped they were. His radio had gone silent hours ago. His canteen was nearly empty. His left leg refused to carry his weight, and the shadow beneath him was growing shorter. The dog was the only living thing he had seen since the storm swallowed the convoy. Frost. Marcus remembered the name from the faded identification patch on the tactical harness. The animal's coat had once been pure white, but now it was streaked with tin dust along his chest and belly. His ears stood high despite exhaustion. His amber eyes remained fixed on the wavering line ahead, as though he could see a road hidden beneath the sand. He was not a large dog by military standards, but every part of him seemed built for purpose. His paws spread wide with each careful step. His back legs braced. His jaw held the strap without shaking, even when the weight behind him became too much. Marcus knew working dogs. He knew their discipline, their signals, and the sacred bond between a K9 and the person whose voice became home. Frost should have obeyed only one handler. He should have stayed with his unit. He should never have crossed miles of open desert for a wounded stranger. Yet here he was, dragging Marcus beneath a merciless sun as if some command had been given that no human being could hear. "Enough," Marcus said. His voice came out rough and thin. "Save yourself." Frost stopped. For one hopeful second, Marcus thought the dog had finally accepted the order. Then Frost released the strap, turned, and walked back to him. The shepherd lowered his nose to Marcus's face. He listened to his breathing. He sniffed the empty canteen, then pressed his muzzle against Marcus's chest where two old dog tags rested beneath his shirt. Marcus closed his eyes. "Wrong Marine," he murmured. "I'm not the man you're looking for." Frost's ears shifted at the sound of his voice. Something passed through the dog's expression, quiet and unreadable. Then he picked up the strap again. The first pull came gently. The second carried more force. By the third, Marcus was moving. The sand whispered beneath his uniform. Above them, the sun washed without mercy. Marcus let his head fall back and searched the sky for aircraft, clouds, anything that might mean rescue. There was nothing. Only blue emptiness and the faint ringing inside his ears. Frost continued west, though the base lay north. Marcus had checked the compass before the heat blurred the markings. The dog was taking him farther away from the search grid, farther from the roads, farther from anyone who might find them. "You're going the wrong way," Marcus warned. Frost pulled harder. A hot wind moved over the flats, lifting thin ribbons of sand around them. For a moment, the dog became a pale shape inside the dust, less like an animal than a memory refusing to disappear. Marcus tried to reach the strap, but his hand fell short. He had no strength left to stop him, no strength left to trust him, either. Still, Frost moved with certainty. 20 feet ahead, half buried beneath a drift, something caught the sunlight. A small brass object flashed once, then vanished as the wind covered it again. Frost froze. His body went still from nose to tail. Slowly, he released the strap and turned toward Marcus. The shepherd stared at the pocket of the Marine's torn field jacket, then at the place where the brass had disappeared. Marcus felt his heart change rhythm. He knew what had fallen from that pocket. He had carried it for 11 months and never used it. A dented training whistle that had belonged to Staff Sergeant Caleb Turner, the only handler Frost had ever trusted. Marcus looked at the dog, and for the first time, Frost looked back as if he had finally found the answer he had crossed the desert to hear. 18 hours earlier, the desert had not yet become an enemy. Dawn spread slowly over the Marine Corps Air-Ground Combat Center at 29 Palms, turning the low mountains bronze and laying long shadows across rows of vehicles, storage buildings, and chain-link fences. The air was already dry, carrying the smell of diesel fuel, sun-warmed rubber, and dust that never truly settled. Somewhere beyond the motor pool, an engine coughed awake. Boots struck gravel in steady rhythm. Metal doors opened, radios crackled, and the base began another morning with the practiced order of a place built around readiness. Near the canine transport area, Frost sat alone inside a reinforced kennel. His white coat looked almost silver in the early light. He was clean, well-fed, and physically sound, yet there was a stillness in him that made the handlers uneasy. For 6 weeks, he had refused every new command given by every new voice. He did not growl. He did not resist the leash. He simply remained seated, watching past the people around him as though someone important was always one step behind them. A laminated transfer sheet hung from the kennel gate. Frost, male German Shepherd, 6 years old. Search and rescue certified. Desert navigation certified. Medically cleared for transport. No longer suitable for active assignment. The last line had been added by hand. Refuses handler replacement. Staff Sergeant Denise Harper stood beside the kennel with a clipboard pressed against her chest. She had worked with military dogs for nearly 15 years and had learned that silence could mean more than barking ever did. He understands every command, she said. He just does not accept who is giving it. Petty Officer Hannah Price looked through the kennel door. Frost met her eyes for a moment, then turned toward the road beyond the fence. How long since his handler died? She asked. Denise lowered the clipboard. 11 months. The answer settled between them with the weight of something unfinished. A transport truck waited nearby, its rear doors open, ready to take Frost to a veterans' animal sanctuary outside Phoenix. It was a good place. Quiet land. Experienced staff. No more deployments. No more desert drills. Everyone said it was the kindest decision left. Frost seemed to know it was also a goodbye. Hannah crouched beside the kennel and rested one hand against the wire. You are not being abandoned, she said softly. Frost did not move. Across the yard, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reed walked between 2 parked utility vehicles with a canvas field bag over one shoulder. He was tall, broad through the chest, and carried himself with the controlled economy of a Marine who had spent years teaching his body never to waste motion. His dark skin caught the low sunlight along one side of his face, while the other remained in shadow beneath the brim of his patrol cover. He had slept badly. The faint heaviness beneath his eyes said so, though nothing else in his expression offered an explanation. He was scheduled to lead a navigation exercise before noon. It should have been routine. A convoy route, a communications test, a recovery drill. Yet as he passed the canine enclosure, his steps slowed. Not stopped, only slowed. Frost rose inside the kennel. Denise noticed first. Her hand tightened around the clipboard. Hannah stood carefully, afraid even a small movement might break whatever was happening. Frost had not stood for Captain Miller. He had not stood for the sanctuary driver. He had not stood when 2 former handlers visited the week before. Now he faced Marcus with his ears forward and his body completely alert. Marcus kept walking. Frost followed him with his eyes. When Marcus reached the end of the fence, the dog pressed close to the gate and released one low breath. Almost a whine, but not quite. Marcus stopped then. The base continued around him. Engines idled. Men called to one another. A flag snapped once in the morning wind. Still, Marcus did not turn. Hannah watched the muscles in his shoulders stiffen beneath his uniform. Sergeant Reed, Denise called. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second before looking back. His gaze found Frost immediately. Something old and painful crossed his face, then disappeared behind discipline. He walked toward the kennel but stopped several feet away. Frost remained standing. His tail did not move. His attention never left the Marine. You know him? Hannah asked. Marcus looked at the transfer sheet, though he did not need to read the name. I know who he is. That is not what I asked. Marcus's jaw tightened. He reached unconsciously toward the chest pocket of his field jacket, where a small brass whistle rested beneath the fabric. Frost's nose lifted. One quiet breath passed through the kennel. Marcus felt it like a hand against a locked door. I knew the man he belonged to, he said. Then he turned away before anyone could ask the question Frost had been waiting 11 months for him to answer. Marcus crossed the motor pool without looking back, but he could feel Frost watching him through the fence. It was not imagination. He had known too many working dogs to mistake the weight of that attention. A trained German Shepherd did not stare without reason. Frost tracked him past the fuel trucks, past the maintenance bay, past the row of tan vehicles waiting for inspection. Even when Marcus turned the corner and the kennel disappeared from view, the feeling remained, quiet and steady, like a hand resting between his shoulders. He entered the operations building and placed his field bag on a metal table. Maps covered one wall. Weather reports flickered across a monitor. The planned route ran 38 miles into the open desert, then curved north through a series of dry washes before returning to the base. Nothing about it looked unusual. The forecast called for wind by late afternoon, but nothing severe. Marcus studied the numbers longer than necessary. His mind was not on the route. It was on a white dog standing behind a gate, and on a man whose voice had once carried across deserts just like this one. "You knew Caleb Turner," Hannah said from the doorway. Marcus did not turn. Most people in the unit knew him. Frost did not stand for most people. Her tone was calm, not accusing, but Marcus heard the question beneath it. He folded the map along its worn crease. Dogs remember scent. He was 20 feet away. Then he remembered something else. Hannah stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The room softened around the sound. Outside, a diesel engine rumbled to life, then settled into a low mechanical hum. "Denise said Frost has ignored every handler since Staff Sergeant Turner died," she said. "Today he looked at you like he had been waiting." Marcus kept his eyes on the map. Waiting does not mean he found what he wanted. What did he want? Marcus finally looked at her. Hannah was younger than he was, but there was nothing uncertain in her expression. Navy corpsmen learned to recognize when pain was hiding behind procedure. They also learned not to look away. Marcus respected that about her. It made lying difficult. "Caleb was my closest friend," he said. The words came out flat, stripped of everything they carried. Hannah waited. Marcus reached for a grease pencil and marked the first checkpoint on the map. "We served together for 7 years. He trusted Frost more than he trusted most people, sometimes with good reason." A memory rose before he could stop it. Caleb kneeling beside Frost beneath the shade of a canvas awning, one hand resting against the dog's white shoulder. The brass whistle between his fingers. The smile that appeared whenever Frost completed a difficult search and returned as if praise mattered more than water. Caleb had always spoken to the dog in a low voice. Never sharp, never hurried. He believed trust could not be commanded. It had to be earned in small pieces, day after day. Marcus pushed the memory down. "Were you there when it happened?" Hannah asked. The grease pencil stopped against the map. "I was there afterward." "Did Frost see you?" "Yes." Marcus's answer came too quickly. He set the pencil down. "He saw everyone." Hannah glanced toward his chest pocket. "He reacted when you touched that." Marcus's hand moved away from the fabric. "It is nothing." Frost did not think so. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft vibration of the air conditioning vent. Marcus could have ended the conversation. Rank would have made it easy. Instead, he reached into the pocket and drew out a small brass whistle attached to a faded cord. Time had darkened the metal around the edges. A shallow dent marked one side. It looked ordinary in his palm, the kind of object someone might overlook in a drawer. Frost had not overlooked it. Hannah studied the whistle but did not touch it. "Caleb's." Marcus nodded. "His wife gave it to me after the memorial." That was not the whole truth. Emily Turner had placed it in Marcus's hand outside the chapel and closed his fingers around it, as if returning something he had lost. She had said only 5 words. "He would want you to keep it." Marcus had carried the whistle ever since, though he had never raised it to his lips. "Why?" Hannah asked. "I do not know." Another lie. He knew exactly why. The whistle belonged to every morning Caleb and Frost had trained before sunrise. It belonged to the hand signals, the desert searches, and the quiet pride in Caleb's face whenever Frost returned. It belonged to a promise Marcus had made beside a flag-draped casket, then failed to keep. A knock sounded at the open doorway. Denise stood there with Frost's transfer papers. "The sanctuary driver is ready," she said. Marcus looked beyond her. Through the narrow window at the end of the hall, he could see part of the kennel yard. Frost stood at the gate, facing the operations building, still waiting. Denise followed his gaze. "He has not taken his eyes off this door." Marcus closed his hand around the whistle. "Then load him before the heat gets worse." Denise did not move. "He may refuse." "He will go." "You sound certain." Marcus placed the whistle back in his pocket. "He is trained." Denise's expression saddened. "So are you." She left without another word. Hannah remained beside the map. Marcus gathered the route sheets and forced his attention toward the mission ahead. Outside, a kennel latch opened. Frost did not bark. He only watched the door through which Marcus would soon leave, as if he already knew the desert was about to ask both of them to remember what one man had tried so hard to forget. Marcus had told himself the transfer was mercy. He repeated it while signing the forms, while speaking with the canine program director, and while watching Frost sit beside an empty kennel door for 3 straight mornings. A quieter life would be better. No more engines at dawn. No more desert drills. No more waiting for a voice that would never return. The words sounded reasonable when spoken aloud. They sounded almost kind. But kindness was not why Marcus had stayed away. 11 months earlier, he had stood outside a small chapel beneath a colorless winter sky, while Marines moved in silence around a flag-draped casket. Frost had been there in a formal working harness, seated near the front steps with his white head held high. He did not whine. He did not pull against the leash. He simply watched every person who left the chapel, searching each face with patient certainty. Marcus had remained near the parking lot until most of the crowd was gone. He could face commanders, grieving parents, and men who had served beside Caleb Turner. He could not face the dog. Frost had known Caleb through scent, footsteps, breathing, and the smallest change in tone. He would know Marcus had been present when Caleb was brought home. He might also know that Marcus had returned while Caleb had not. Emily Turner found Marcus standing beside his truck with his hands buried in the pockets of his dress coat. She wore Caleb's wedding ring on a thin chain around her neck. Her eyes were tired, but her voice remained steady. "He left something for you." She placed the brass whistle in Marcus's palm. The metal was still warm from her hand. Marcus stared at it without closing his fingers. "This belongs with Frost." Caleb did not think so. Emily looked toward the chapel steps, where the white shepherd remained beside a handler he barely acknowledged. "He said you would understand when the time came." Marcus had wanted to ask what that meant. Instead, he had looked down at the dent along the whistle's edge, remembering the afternoon Caleb had dropped it between 2 rocks during a training exercise and spent an hour searching until Frost found it. Caleb had laughed as if the dog had recovered buried treasure. That laugh lived inside the small piece of brass now. Marcus closed his hand around it. "I should have done more," he said. Emily did not offer him forgiveness. She did not accuse him, either. She only answered, "Then do more now." Frost noticed Marcus when he finally approached. The dog stood before Marcus reached the steps. His ears lifted. His body leaned forward. For one painful second, hope entered his amber eyes. Marcus knelt, and Frost searched behind him, looking toward the parking lot, the chapel doors, and the path between the buildings. Marcus understood. The dog believed Caleb might be following. "He is not coming," Marcus whispered. Frost looked at him again. Marcus placed one hand against the shepherd's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the thick white fur. The promise came before he had time to measure it. "I brought him home. I will not leave you behind." Frost held his gaze. Then he lowered his head beneath Marcus's hand. It should have been the beginning of something. Instead, Marcus disappeared from the canine facility for nearly a month. He answered calls with messages. He missed 2 scheduled visits. When Frost was offered a temporary handler, Marcus approved it without attending the introduction. Each decision carried the same excuse. Frost needed stability. Frost needed professional care. Frost needed someone who did not wake before dawn hearing Caleb's last words in the dark. The temporary placement failed. Frost completed basic routines, but refused search commands. A second placement lasted 4 days. By the 3rd attempt, the program began discussing retirement. Marcus signed the recommendation within an hour. The signature looked clean on the page. His hand did not shake until he was alone. Now, inside the operations building at 29 Palms, the same guilt returned with the dry morning heat. Through the window, he watched Denise guide Frost toward the transport truck. The dog walked calmly beside her until he reached the open crate. Then he stopped. Denise gave a gentle command. Frost remained still. She tried again. The sanctuary driver waited without impatience. Marcus told himself not to move. This was the decision he had already made. Frost would have shade, open land, and people trained to care for retired working dogs. Nothing about. That future was cruel. Still, the shepherd turned his head toward the operations building. Even through dusty glass and nearly 100 feet of distance, his eyes found Marcus. Hannah stood beside him, saying nothing. Marcus felt the whistle against his chest. He thinks I betrayed him, he said. Dogs do not use that word, Hannah replied. They only know who came back. Marcus watched Denise lead Frost away from the crate to try another approach. I was supposed to take responsibility for him. Why did you not? Marcus looked toward the desert beyond the base, where morning light was already whitening the horizon. Because every time he looks at me, I remember the promise I made. Hannah's voice softened. That is not the same as answering the question. Marcus lifted his field bag and turned toward the convoy staging area. No, he said. It is the reason I never did. Behind him, Frost remained beside the transport truck, listening as Marcus's footsteps faded once more, while the wind moved across the base carrying the first thin warning of the storm to come. By 8:30 that morning, the convoy had left the paved roads behind. 6 tin vehicles moved south across the training range in a staggered line, tires pressing dark tracks into the pale sand before the wind softened them again. Marcus rode in the lead utility vehicle with one hand resting near the folded route map and the other on the wheel. The horizon looked clean. Too clean. Low ridges stood beneath a washed blue sky, and the desert stretched between them like an empty sea. The heat had not yet reached its full strength, but the metal dashboard was already warm beneath his fingers. Behind him, engines droned in patient rhythm. Every few minutes, a voice came through the radio to confirm distance and direction. The exercise was simple. Reach the first checkpoint, test communications across the eastern basin, then return by the northern wash before afternoon winds arrived. Marcus had completed harder routes in worse conditions. Still, something in the air felt unsettled. The wind came in brief, uncertain breaths, then disappeared. Fine dust lifted from the ground without traveling far, hanging just above the surface like smoke. Marcus checked the sky through the windshield. A thin brown line had appeared along the western horizon. It was so faint that another man might have mistaken it for distant hills. Marcus did not. All vehicles, reduce spacing, he said into the radio. Keep visual contact. We may have weather moving faster than forecast. The reply came one by one. Calm voices. No concern. The convoy continued. At the second marker, the brown line had grown taller. It covered half the western ridges now, rising in a wall that blurred earth and sky together. Marcus stopped the lead vehicle and stepped outside. The desert heat pressed against him immediately. He tasted dust before the storm reached them. Petty Officer Hannah Price climbed down from the third vehicle and walked forward, shielding her eyes. That was not in the morning report, she said. It is now. Marcus looked at his watch. They were 18 miles from the base and nearly 7 miles from the nearest hardened shelter. Turning back meant crossing open flats with no protection. Continuing north meant entering the dry washes, where visibility might be better but radio signals could weaken. He studied the map on the hood while the wind snapped its corners. We take the north route, he decided. Close formation. No vehicle leaves visual range. Hannah looked toward the growing wall. How long do we have? Marcus folded the map. Less than we want. The first gust struck 5 minutes later. It hit the convoy sideways, hard enough to rock the lighter vehicles on their suspension. Sand rattled against the doors and windows in sudden bursts. The sunlight changed from white to amber. Then amber became copper. Marcus switched on the headlights though morning had not ended. The vehicles behind him became dim shapes in the mirrors. Lead to convoy, confirm positions. One response arrived clearly. The next came beneath static. The last two were nearly lost. Marcus slowed to 15 miles per hour. The trail ahead vanished and returned in pieces. A marker post appeared in the headlights, then disappeared behind them as if swallowed. Wind pushed against the side of the vehicle with growing force. Sand streamed across the ground in long, fast ribbons. Stay on my track, Marcus ordered. Do not pass. Do not stop unless the vehicle ahead stops. The radio answered with broken acknowledgments. The storm reached them fully before they entered the first wash. Daylight disappeared. Not gradually. One moment the desert remained visible through a brown haze, and the next the world ended 10 feet beyond the windshield. Marcus could see only the narrow beam of his own headlights and the wild movement of sand inside them. The vehicle's tires slipped as the trail curved downward. He eased off the accelerator and followed the compass heading. Behind him, one pair of headlights remained visible. Then another gust erased them. Second vehicle, report. Static. Second vehicle, report. A voice answered, but the words broke apart. Marcus caught only visual lost and holding position. He reached for the map secured beside his seat. At that instant, the front tire dropped into a rut hidden beneath loose sand. The vehicle tilted sharply, slid several feet, and came to rest at an angle inside a shallow dry channel. Marcus remained still for one breath, both hands gripping the wheel. The engine continued running. Nothing had struck him. Nothing appeared damaged except the left front tire, which spun uselessly when he tested it. He took the radio microphone. Lead vehicle disabled in the wash. Marking position. Only static answered. Marcus tried again. No response. The storm pressed against the vehicle in deep, steady waves. Sand hissed along the roof. He checked the emergency unit. The display flickered once, then went dark. The main radio had power, but no signal escaped the walls of dust and stone around him. Marcus reached for his canteen and listened. Less than half full. He looked toward the rear window, hoping to see headlights. There were none. For the first time that morning, the desert felt truly empty. Marcus opened the door against the wind and stepped into the storm to place a signal marker on the roof. The force of the sand made him lower his head. He moved carefully along the side of the vehicle, one hand gripping the frame. Beneath his right boot, the ground gave way. Marcus dropped hard onto one knee and caught himself against the door. A sharp strain moved through his left leg. He did not cry out. He waited for the pain to settle, then tried to stand. The leg held, but only barely. He climbed back inside, closed the door, and breathed through the dust that had followed him. On the seat beside him, the brass whistle had slipped halfway from his pocket. Marcus pushed it back in and looked toward the blank windshield. Somewhere beyond the storm, the convoy was searching for a safe route. Somewhere behind them, a white German shepherd stood beside a transport truck, listening to a wind that carried more than weather across the desert. At the canine transport area, the storm announced itself before anyone saw it. The first sign was not the wind. It was Frost. He had been standing beside the open transport crate, still facing the operations building, when his ears turned sharply toward the southern range. His body changed in an instant. The quiet weight inside him became a tension. His nose lifted. He drew in one slow breath, then another, reading what the air carried across miles of open desert. Denise Harper noticed the movement and followed his gaze. Beyond the vehicle yard, the sky had darkened to a deep brown along the horizon. Dust climbed higher with every passing second, swallowing the distant ridges beneath a moving wall. The sanctuary driver stepped down from the truck and closed the passenger door. "We should get him loaded before that reaches us," he said. Denise gave Frost the boarding command. The shepherd did not look at the crate. His eyes remained fixed south. She repeated the command, firmer this time. Frost took one step forward, but not toward the truck. A low sound formed in his chest. It was not fear. It was recognition. "What do you hear?" Denise whispered. The first gust crossed the base and struck the parked vehicles with a hollow metallic shudder. Loose paper spun across the gravel. Somewhere near the maintenance sheds, a door slammed shut. Personnel began moving with purpose, securing equipment and guiding vehicles beneath cover. Frost pulled against the lead. Denise tightened her grip. "Easy. Stay with me." He had never resisted her before. Even after Caleb died, Frost had remained controlled. Distant. Unresponsive to search commands, but controlled. Now every muscle beneath his white coat leaned toward the desert. The wind shifted again, carrying dust, fuel, hot stone, and something too faint for any human nose to separate. Frost began pacing. 3 steps toward the fence. Turn. 3 steps back. His eyes returned again and again to the road Marcus had taken that morning. Major Nathan Cole arrived from the operations building with his patrol cover held against the wind. "Get that transport inside," he ordered. The convoy lost radio contact near the northern wash. "We are assembling a recovery team." Denise looked at him. "Who is missing?" "We do not know yet." The vehicles separated when visibility dropped. Frost stopped pacing at the word convoy. His ears came forward. Major Cole continued speaking, but the shepherd no longer watched him. Frost lowered his nose to the ground beside the rear tire of Marcus's utility vehicle, still parked near the staging area. Marcus had leaned against that tire less than an hour earlier while checking the route sheets. Frost traced the scent across the gravel, past the operations steps, then back toward the gate. Denise felt the lead draw tight. He is tracking Sergeant Reed. Major Cole glanced at the dog. He has not worked a search in 11 months. He remembers him. That does not make this a deployment. Another gust struck. Sand swept across the yard in a solid sheet. Frost turned into it, eyes narrowed, body steady. The sanctuary driver opened the transport crate wider. We can settle him once he is inside. Denise guided Frost toward the ramp. He followed for 2 steps, then planted all 4 paws. She tried the hand signal Caleb had once used for boarding. Frost looked at her, calm but unmoving. "Please," she said quietly. "Not today." A radio on Major Cole's vest cracked through the wind. One voice reported that 5 convoy vehicles had regrouped near the eastern marker. The lead vehicle was not among them. Marcus Reed had not answered 3 calls. Frost heard the name. He lunged toward the southern gate with such sudden purpose that the lead slipped through Denise's gloved hand. She caught the loop again before he reached the fence. Frost turned, pulled once, then looked directly at her. There was no panic in his face. Only urgency. "He knows," Denise said. Major Cole shook his head. He heard a familiar name. "That is all." Frost pulled again. The metal clasp on the temporary lead struck the kennel frame. Denise wrapped the strap around her wrist, but the shepherd lowered his weight and drove forward. The latch on the narrow service gate had not been fully secured after the morning inspection. It lifted beneath the pressure. The gate opened 6 inches. Frost forced his shoulder through the gap. Denise released the lead before it could tighten around her hand. "Frost." The dog cleared the gate and ran. His white coat flashed between parked vehicles, then vanished behind the supply building. Major Cole called for 2 Marines to block the southern access road. They reached it too late. Frost crossed beneath the raised barrier as the first heavy curtain of dust rolled over the base. Denise ran after him until the wind drove sand into her eyes and erased the road ahead. "Come back," she shouted. No answer came. Only the rising storm and the fading rhythm of paws against hard ground. Major Cole reached her moments later. He will turn around when the scent breaks. Denise stared into the brown air where Frost had disappeared. "No," she said. "That dog has spent 11 months waiting for one man to come back. He is not turning around now." Beyond the perimeter, Frost lowered his head and ran south. The storm covered every track almost as soon as he made it, but he did not need tracks. Marcus's scent lived inside the wind, tangled with dust and distance, faint but present. Frost followed it beyond the last fence post, beyond the service road, and into a desert that had already hidden the Marine from every human searching for him. The storm erased distance, direction, and time. Frost ran through it with his head low and his ears flattened, following a scent no human could have found beneath the dust. Each gust changed the desert around him. Familiar ground vanished under moving sand. Dry brush bent almost flat. Small stones skipped across the hard earth and disappeared into the brown air. Frost did not slow. Marcus's scent came and went in broken threads, mixed with engine oil, canvas, leather, and the faint metallic trace of the brass whistle hidden inside his field jacket. Whenever the trail weakened, Frost stopped, lifted his nose, and waited for the wind to speak again. Then he moved. Nearly 12 miles from the base, Marcus sat inside the disabled vehicle and watched the sand rise against the doors. The engine had failed 40 minutes earlier. Heat collected beneath the roof, turning the cabin into a sealed metal box. His radio continued to release nothing but static. He had tried the emergency channel, the convoy frequency, and every backup number printed on the card beside the dashboard. No voice answered. The storm had covered the windshield until daylight became a dim copper glow. Marcus loosened his collar and took one careful swallow from the canteen. It was the last water he allowed himself. His injured leg had begun to stiffen. The pain was not sharp now. It had settled into a deep pressure that grew whenever he tried to stand. He knew staying with the vehicle was usually the safest choice. A vehicle was larger than a man, easier to find, more protection from exposure. But the wash was filling with sand, and the tilted frame had begun to sink. If the storm continued, the doors might not open at all. Marcus checked the compass, secured the whistle inside his chest pocket, and wrapped a cloth over his nose and mouth. He pushed the driver's door with both hands. Sand resisted from the other side. The gap opened only wide enough for him to force one shoulder through. Wind struck him immediately. He climbed out slowly, keeping his weight on his right leg, and moved toward a line of dark rocks he had seen before visibility vanished. They were less than 100 yards away. In the storm, they might as well have been a mile. Marcus used the vehicle frame for support until his hand reached empty air. Then he stepped forward alone. The first 20 yards passed beneath him in careful, uneven movements. The next 10 required both hands on his left thigh to keep the leg steady. The wind leaned against his back, then shifted and pressed him sideways. Sand gathered inside his boots. It scraped against his cheeks and filled every fold of his uniform. The rocks appeared for 1 second, dark shapes through the dust, then disappeared again. Marcus followed the compass bearing and counted his steps. At 47, his injured leg gave way. He lowered himself rather than falling, one knee sinking into loose sand. For several breaths, he remained there with his head bowed. "Get up," he told himself. The desert gave no answer. Marcus tried again. His arms shook with effort. He managed 3 steps before sitting back down. The storm moved around him with the sound of distant surf. He could no longer see the vehicle. He could no longer see the rocks. There was only brown air and the narrow space his body occupied inside it. Marcus reached for the radio attached to his vest, though he already knew it was useless. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reed," he said. "Lead vehicle disabled near the northern wash. I am on foot. Injured leg. Moving toward rock cover." Static returned his words to him. He waited, listening for anything beneath it. For one moment, he thought he heard a faint rhythm in the wind. Not an engine, not a voice. For quick impacts, then silence. Marcus turned his head. The sound came again. Pause against packed earth. He narrowed his eyes into the storm. A pale shape appeared 20 feet away, vanished, then emerged closer. At first, Marcus thought the heat had followed him into the dust and created something impossible. Then 2 amber eyes found him. Frost stopped 3 feet away. His white coat had turned the color of the desert along his legs and chest. Dust clung to his muzzle. His sides rose and fell quickly, but his gaze remained clear. Marcus stared at him. "No," he whispered. Frost stepped forward and pressed his nose to Marcus's shoulder. He moved down the Marine's arm, checked the radio, then lowered his head toward the injured leg without touching it. His training had returned with perfect certainty. Marcus reached for the dog's harness and found the identification patch beneath the sand. Frost. The shepherd looked at him. Marcus felt relief rise, followed immediately by fear. The dog had crossed open desert alone. The storm was worsening. "Go back," Marcus said. "Find your handler." Frost did not move. Marcus pointed north. "Return to base." The command was clear. The tone was firm. Frost's ears shifted, but his body remained beside Marcus. "I am not your handler," Marcus said. The dog circled once, scanning the air, then returned to the Marine's left side. He nudged the canteen, smelled the empty opening, and looked toward the west. Marcus followed his gaze, but saw nothing. "There is no one out there." Frost stepped behind him and took the casualty drag handle at the back of his tactical vest between his teeth. Marcus felt the strap tighten. "Stop." Frost braced his front paws and pulled. Marcus moved several inches across the sand. The dog released the strap, came around, and looked directly into his face. There was no confusion in those amber eyes. No request for permission. Only the steady resolve of a promise Marcus did not yet understand. Frost returned to the strap, lowered his shoulders, and began pulling him into the storm. Frost pulled until the storm became less like weather and more like a world with no edges. Marcus could not tell how long they had been moving. Minutes dissolved inside the wind. The desert beneath him changed from loose sand to hard ground, then back again, each surface scraping softly beneath his uniform as the dog dragged him forward. Frost worked in short, measured efforts. He lowered his shoulders, tightened the strap between his teeth, and pulled for 10 or 15 feet. Then he released it, circled back, and checked Marcus's face. He listened to the Marine's breathing. He touched the canteen with his nose. He waited until Marcus opened his eyes before beginning again. It was not panic. It was procedure. Somewhere inside the white shepherd, 11 months of silence had opened, and every lesson Caleb Turner had ever taught him was alive again. Marcus tried to help by pushing with his right heel, but the movement made his injured leg tighten. He stopped before the pain, stole what strength remained. "Easy," he told the dog. Frost did not slow. The wind began to thin after another mile. Shapes returned gradually. First the ground, then scattered brush, then low stone ridges emerging through the dust like islands in dark water. Marcus lifted the compass attached to his vest and waited for the needle to steady. North lay behind them. The base was northeast. Frost was taking him west. Marcus checked again. Certain exhaustion had confused him. The needle gave the same answer. Stop. Frost continued. Frost, stop. The command carried more force this time. The dog released the strap and looked back. Marcus raised the compass. You are going the wrong way. Frost turned toward the west, nose raised, ears moving independently as he listened across the open land. Then he came back for the strap. Marcus caught it first. His fingers closed around the thick fabric, preventing the dog from taking hold. No, the convoy is behind us. The base is that way. He pointed northeast. Frost watched the gesture but did not follow it. Instead, he stepped close and pressed his nose against Marcus's hand. You found me. You did your job. Marcus swallowed against the dryness in his throat. Now go back and bring someone. Frost stood completely still. The fading storm moved dust around his legs. In the quiet that followed, Marcus heard the dogs breathing and the faint ticking of sand against the compass cover. Go, Marcus said. Frost lowered himself beside him. His chest touched the ground. His eyes remained on Marcus's face. He would not leave. Marcus felt frustration rise because fear was too difficult to name. Every instinct told him to move toward the road, the convoy, and the search teams trained to follow the planned route. Frost wanted to lead him farther into empty country where the map showed nothing but rock and dry washes. Marcus had trusted men with less certainty than this dog now offered, yet trust was the one thing he no longer knew how to give. He looked west. The sun was hidden, but the sky there had begun to brighten behind the dust. A narrow break between two ridges formed a dark line in the distance. Frost stared at it. What is out there? Marcus asked. The shepherd stood. He took the strap carefully, almost gently, and waited. Marcus held on for another second. Then his hand opened. Frost pulled. They moved across the flats one measured distance at a time. The storm continued east, leaving a copper haze behind it. Heat returned quickly as the wind weakened. Marcus counted Frost's efforts to keep himself awake. 20 pulls. Rest. 18 pulls. Rest. At every pause, the dog checked the air and adjusted their direction by a few degrees. He avoided patches of deep sand. He chose firmer ground along the edges of the washes. Once, when Marcus's boot caught beneath a root, Frost stopped before the strap tightened and came back to free it with his nose. Caleb taught you that, Marcus whispered. Frost's ears turned at the name, but he did not look back. The reaction was small. It was enough. Marcus remembered Caleb describing an abandoned weather station used during an old desert navigation course. He had mentioned a water locker, emergency supplies, and a stone wall that stayed cool after sunset. Marcus searched his memory for the location, but grief had blurred too many details. Is that where you are taking me? Frost pulled harder. The ridges ahead grew taller. Shadows collected along their lower edges. Marcus checked the compass once more. They were still moving west, farther from the official search grid with every step. Doubt returned, heavy and practical. Frost could be following an old training route that no longer led anywhere. The station might have been removed years ago. Even if it remained, no one would think to search there. Marcus reached for the strap again. We cannot keep doing this. Frost stopped and turned. Marcus saw the dust packed between the dog's toes, the trembling in his front legs, and the determined steadiness of his eyes. Frost had crossed miles to find him. Now Marcus was asking him to abandon the only direction he trusted. I am sorry, Marcus said. I do not know how to follow you. He shifted to sit more upright. The movement pulled at his field jacket. Something slipped from his chest pocket, struck a small stone, and landed in the sand with a muted, metallic sound. Frost froze. His head turned toward the ground. Half buried beside Marcus's hand, the dented brass whistle caught one thin blade of afternoon light. Frost released the strap and stepped toward it with the reverence of a dog approaching a voice he had never stopped hearing. Frost lowered his head until his nose almost touched the brass whistle. He did not pick it up at first. He stood over it, breathing slowly, as if the small dented object carried a scent that had survived 11 months of grief, desert wind, and human silence. Marcus watched the dog's posture change. The trembling in Frost's front legs remained, but something steadier moved beneath it. His ears lifted. His eyes softened. For the first time since crossing the storm, he no longer looked like a dog searching for direction. He looked like a dog who had found it. Marcus reached down and brushed the sand from the whistle with his thumb. The metal was hot from the ground. He turned it in his palm and saw the shallow mark along one side where Caleb had dropped it years ago during a training exercise. The memory returned with such clarity that the desert around him seemed to disappear. Caleb stood beneath a white morning sky, laughing as Frost searched between two rock shelves. "He does not follow sound alone," Caleb had said. "He follows what the sound means." Marcus had leaned against a field vehicle, watching Frost move in wide circles through the dust. "A whistle is a whistle." Caleb shook his head. "Not to him. 1 note means stop. 2 means return. 3 means find me." Then Caleb had raised the brass whistle and blown 3 short calls. Frost had turned instantly, crossed the open ground, and found him behind a low stone wall. Caleb had knelt, placed both hands against the dog's neck, and whispered praise that no one else was meant to hear. Marcus looked down at the same whistle now. Frost stared at it without blinking. "You remember," Marcus said. The shepherd's ears moved at the sound of his voice, but his gaze remained fixed on the brass. Marcus brought the whistle to his lips. His mouth was dry, and the first breath produced almost nothing, only a weak thread of air. Frost stepped closer. Marcus tried again. This time one thin note crossed the desert. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Frost closed his eyes for the briefest moment. The wind moved over his white coat, carrying the sound toward the western ridges. Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too simple. This was recognition. A bridge between the living and the lost. "Caleb," he whispered. Frost opened his eyes. Marcus gave 2 more short notes, separated by careful breaths. 3 in all. "Find me." The command Caleb had used when he disappeared beyond a ridge or hid inside an abandoned structure during training. Frost turned toward the west. His body became alert from nose to tail. He walked several feet, stopped, and looked back at Marcus. Then he scanned the narrow break between the ridges. The movement was precise. Familiar. "This is one of his routes," Marcus said. Frost returned to the casualty drag strap and took it gently between his teeth. Marcus no longer resisted. "All right," he murmured. "Show me." The dog pulled. Their path shifted several degrees south, toward a shallow rise Marcus had mistaken for empty stone. Frost chose firmer ground along its base. Every 50 feet, he stopped and checked the wind. Once, he turned in a tight circle before correcting west again. Marcus recognized the pattern now. It was not wandering. Frost was rebuilding an old search map from scent, terrain, and memory. Caleb had trained him here. Maybe not on this exact day or under this sky, but somewhere among these ridges, the dog had learned where shade collected, where stone held cooler air, and where emergency water might remain after the roads disappeared beneath sand. Marcus tightened his hand around the whistle. "He knew you might need this place again," he said. Frost pulled without looking back. The sun lowered behind the haze, turning the rocks the color of old copper. Shadows stretched across the ground, offering brief relief from the heat. Marcus's strength continued to fade, but fear no longer controlled every thought. He watched Frost navigate around soft drifts and broken brush, using the terrain as if Caleb's footsteps still marked it. After another quarter mile, the shepherd climbed a low rise and stopped. His ears came forward. Marcus lifted his head. Beyond the ridge, almost hidden against the stone, stood a narrow metal pole leaning toward the sky. A weather vane hung from the top, motionless and rusted. Below it, part of a flat roof showed through the dust. The building was small, faded, and nearly swallowed by the desert, but it was real. Frost released the strap and looked back at Marcus. In his amber eyes was the same quiet certainty Caleb had trusted with his life. Marcus raised the whistle once more, not to give a command, but to honor the one that had brought them there. A single note drifted across the rocks. Frost turned toward the abandoned station and began pulling again, carrying Marcus toward the last place his handler had taught him never to leave a lost man behind.